Good morning, everyone. Can I welcome you to the 14th meeting in 2013 of the Infrastructure and Capital Investment Committee. Can I remind everyone to switch off their mobile devices as they do impact on the broadcasting system, although some members of the committee might be looking at their papers in digital format. We've got apologies again from Adam Ingram, and Patterson is attending as committee substitute. The first item of business today is to hear evidence from the Cabinet Secretary for Infrastructure and Cities on broadband matters. This update was offered at the Cabinet Secretary's Infrastructure Update session in March. So today I welcome Nicola Sturgeon, Cabinet Secretary for Infrastructure and Cities, and Colin Cook, Deputy Director, Digital Strategy and Programmes of the Scottish Government. Can I welcome you both, and Cabinet Secretary, can I invite you to make some opening remarks?
Thanks, Convener. And given the subject matter of our discussion today, it's very appropriate that some members are viewing their papers on digital devices. I appreciate the opportunity to come along here and give an update on broadband work that the government is doing. We had some discussion around this at my last appearance before the committee in March, and I think it's a good opportunity to go into a bit more detail. Let me just run through some of the headlines and then we can get into questions. Shortly after I was at the committee in March, Highlands and Islands Enterprise signed a contract with BT to deliver next generation broadband across the Highlands and Islands. That's a key step, a very important step on the road to fulfilling our ambition to become a world-class digital nation. It's also an investment of £126.4 million in what is, without a shadow of a doubt, one of the most complex civil engineering programmes ever seen in the telecommunications sector. And I think it is worth just highlighting some of the detail of this project, because the details are impressive both in their scale and in their complexity. The Highlands and Islands project will deliver a fibre backbone that will stretch from Campbelltown in Argyll to Bray on Shetland via new network nerve centres in dozens of towns, including Oban, Fort William, Aviemore, Ullapool. It involves laying more than 800 kilometres of fibre on land, which I'm told, I haven't calculated it myself, but I'm told is enough to cross the Skye Bridge 1,400 times. In addition to that, it involves laying 400 kilometres of subsea cables, which will serve remote locations like Islay, Jura, Stornoway and South Uist. So it's an enormous project, both in scale and in its complexity across some of the most rugged terrain, not just in Scotland or the UK, but in Europe. Detailed technical and survey work is already underway. Highlands and Islands Enterprise and BT expect to announce the first communities that will be upgraded this autumn, with the first homes and businesses able to connect to fibre by March 2014. The new network is expected to deliver next generation broadband access to 84% of premises in the Highlands and Islands, and will provide a platform for future economic development and regeneration across the region. The second piece of the step change jigsaw is £156 million investment to provide next generation access for the 27 local authorities and 2 national parks in the rest of Scotland. That's been negotiated against an incredibly demanding timetable. We're geared up, along with local authority partners, to have all of the required approvals in place and to take a decision on the tender this month. And we're preparing to move into the deployment phase of this project as quickly as possible after contract award. You will appreciate that, given that the Rest of Scotland procurement process is ongoing, I am by necessity limited in what I can say today in terms of the detail of supplier negotiations, but I am happy to provide the committee with a detailed update after the summer recess, when I very much hope that implementation will be underway. What I can say is that the success of step change will be based on the partnership that's developed between the government and local authorities, and that partnership has seen 14 local authorities identify an additional £50 million to meet local needs and priorities on top of the coverage that will be provided from the national funding pot. And at the same time, we're focused on delivering the national target of providing next generation access to more than 85% of premises across the country as a whole, and to ensure that all other premises have, as a minimum, access to infrastructure capable of providing basic broadband. So that's an update on Step Change. Step Change is an important, the biggest part of our broadband policy, but I'll just very briefly mention the other aspects. Community Broadband Scotland is a £5 million initiative that is supporting rural and remote communities and helping them deliver broadband solutions in their own areas. Work's underway in the first 6 communities selected for support, and we expect to see them connected in the coming months. Our Demonstrating Digital programme is about showcasing the art of the possible by trialling and demonstrating newer emerging technologies to give people today a glimpse of what digital technology can offer in the future. We've also launched the Digital Dialogue, which is a programme of events, seminars and demonstrations to stimulate debate and allow us to test ideas about the digital future. And a key part of this was the Digital Scotland Conference in Edinburgh last month. So taken together, convener, all of that is a very ambitious programme of work, but it is an absolutely essential programme of work. Broadband infrastructure these days is as critical to the nation's overall infrastructure as road and rail is, and it's absolutely essential that we do what needs to be done now, invest what needs to be invested now to make sure that we have that world-class infrastructure that people can then use and take advantage of. So I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee has.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Elaine, do you want to start questioning?
Much, Convener. The Highlands and Islands procurement contract has now been finalised. Is it still on schedule for the rest of Scotland procurement contract to be on schedule for next month?
Yes, as I indicated in my opening remarks, we are up against a very challenging timescale in the rest of Scotland. I should say that that timescale has been made all the more challenging by the delay in tender return that was caused by BD UK's failed state application for the Super Connected Cities programme. That inadvertently necessitated a change to the intervention area for 3 of the cities that are covered by the rest of Scotland procurement. That's Glasgow, Edinburgh and Aberdeen. So we've had to work with those cities to minimise the impact of that de-scoping and allow BT sufficient time to remodel the bid as a result of that. So these timescales are challenging, but as I said, we are expecting to receive BT's tender next week on Monday. We then expect to be, obviously we need to give due consideration to the tender and the bid when we get it, but we are expecting to be in a position to finalise all contractual details by the end of this month, the end of June, with final contract signature by middle of July.
The target was that 90% of Scottish households would have speeds of between 40 and 80 megabits per second by 2015. Is that still on target for delivery? Again,
you've encapsulated the ambition, which is next generation broadband, which is at the speeds you've spoken about, to 85 to 90% of households across Scotland. You know, these are challenging timescales. Our intention and our ambition is to deliver as much access by the end of 2015 as possible. It is, and you know, this is explicit in the contract for the Highlands and Islands project. Some of that will go into 2016, but obviously we're looking at all opportunities to accelerate rollout. These are big projects, but the commitment is there, the investment is there, and it's now about getting on and delivering. It's in that phase already for the Highlands and Islands, and hopefully in the next few weeks we'll be in that delivery phase for the rest of Scotland as well.
If I could be very parochial just for the time being, and I've actually written to you, you may have seen the letters across your desk, or will be coming across your desk, about the progress in the south of Scotland. In the south of Scotland, as you know, both Dumfries and Galloway Council and Scottish Borders Council committed fairly significant sums of money to a superfast broadband project for the south of Scotland. It became rolled up in the rest of Scotland project, and no more information is available on their website in terms of its progress. And I just wondered if you were able to give any sort of update on that
information will become more expansive as we go through contract finalisation and into implementation. Obviously, we've not received the BT bid yet, so we cannot then be clear about the areas of coverage of that contract, which will then allow local authorities to become more specific about the areas of coverage that will be achieved by their additional funding. I should say the additional investment committed by 14 local authorities across the rest of Scotland is very welcome. The relationship between the Scottish Government and local authorities on this work is very good and very strong. But that is intended, that local authority funding is intended to top up the provision that will be provided from the national pot, which, as we've already alluded to, is 85% coverage across the country, and in each local authority area in the rest of Scotland, a minimum floor of 75%, which will be delivered from the national pot before any of the local authority funding is used to top that up.
And if I could just add, I mean, both Borders and Dumfries and Galloway councils are two of our biggest contributors to this overall programme. Once the tender is in and evaluated and signed, there'll be a short period where surveys have to take place to verify some of the assumptions that have been made. But as soon as we can, there will be a national website covering both the rest of Scotland and the Highlands and Islands contract, where people will be able to look and get a sense of when the rollout is coming to their area. So there'll be, total communication once both those contracts are in.
That would certainly be useful, because there's quite a lot of frustration in those areas which still have very poor coverage. Just finally, in terms of the Highlands and Islands procurement, are there any particular lessons that have been learned from the experience of finalisation of that contract, which could be used for the benefit of the rest of Scotland procurement?
We've tried throughout this to ensure that there is alignment and coordination between Scottish Government and Highlands and Islands Enterprise on the Highlands and Islands Step Change project, and making sure that there is appropriate feed through into the rest of Scotland. The two projects are subject to the same governance and lessons are being shared between them. I think it's also important to stress that the two programmes are being conducted through different procurement routes, but there is a very high similarity in terms of the requirements and the contracts in place for each. I think it's probably slightly premature, given that the Rest of Scotland project is still being negotiated as we speak right now, to talk in too much detail about specific lessons being learned from the Highlands and Islands project. Suffice to say, there is close alignment to make sure that appropriate lessons are learned and carried forward into the final stages of the Rest of Scotland negotiation.
Cabinet Secretary, are you BT obviously won the Highlands and Islands bid, and at the end of the day were the sole group remaining in the bid. Is that the same for the rest of Scotland then?
That is the same.
Okay. Jim.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. Can I just ask, how do we ensure that there are sufficient safeguards built into the contracts, both the contract for the Highlands and Islands, and which has been agreed in the forthcoming contract for the rest of Scotland, to ensure that high standards of work are delivered?
Well, obviously both contracts have been, very rigorously. One of them is being very rigorously negotiated. One of them has been very rigorously negotiated to ensure not just that they are capable of delivering on the targets and the ambitions and the commitments that we've made, but they do so to a very high standard of work. There's a range of protocols in place involving, if I talk particularly about the Rest of Scotland project, the Rest of Scotland team, the Scottish Government, local authority teams, utilities departments and BT, to make sure that we're able to maintain quality and, if needs be, and we hope it wouldn't, that there are processes in place for ensuring that speedy action can be taken to correct any failings. I mean, members will be aware of the fine that BT has recently had levied by the Roadworks Commissioner in relation to a number of failures in terms of BT Openreach, and obviously BT is very anxious to say and to demonstrate that it's learning lessons from that exercise and from the failings there, to make sure that that's applied in terms of the rollout of these contracts.
That's helpful. I mean, it's perhaps inevitable, given the scale and the ambition of what is being proposed, that there will be failures from time to time. But I think that the key issue for the public and for the committee is to ensure that any fines that are levied against BT or any other, BT in this case, are met by the contractor and not by the taxpayer.
Absolutely, and obviously fines would be a matter for the Roadworks Commissioner. I think there is a consultation at the moment, or about to take place, about raising the maximum level of those fines. I think the other point to make is, while fines are obviously important if any company fails in its obligations, so too is the publicity. I mean, the bad publicity that comes from that. That's a deterrent as well. These are high-profile contracts that a lot of people have got a great deal of expectation around, not just in terms of what they ultimately deliver, but in terms of the quality of work along the way to that. So, you know, we will work with the various parties to ensure that we minimise any concerns about the quality of work, and that we are implementing these contracts to ensure that they are fulfilled to the highest quality.
And just finally, you talked about the investment by BT, by the Scottish Government, and the partnership with local authorities. Are you satisfied that there is sufficient investment being made to deliver our ambitions in relation to broadband?
Yes, I mean we've got the funding pot topped up by £50 million now in the rest of Scotland from the 14 local authorities. The allocation of our national funding pot is, as I indicated, £126.4 million to Highlands and Islands, £5 million to the Community Broadband Scotland initiative, and the rest of that is the Rest of Scotland project that topped up by the local authority contribution. So it is a significant public investment in delivering what is essential national infrastructure, and I believe that investment will allow us to meet the targets and the ambitions we've set to give people the access and the speed of broadband that they aspire to.
As to the £50,000 in fines, where does that money go?
What happens to the 50,000? The fine?
That's a good question. What do we know? We'll find that out.
I honestly don't know.
It's the Scottish Road Works Commissioner that levies it, so that's a good question which I don't have the answer to at my fingertips, so we'll provide that information to you.
All right, Margaret.
Good morning, Minister. Putting the broadband infrastructure in place is very important, and people and businesses must also be encouraged to actually support and know how to use the technology. Can the Cabinet Secretary give us some information about the work that's been done to support businesses to use the technology, particularly SMEs?
That's a very good question. I mean, it is, I think, understandable that there has been as much focus on the provision of infrastructure, because you can't achieve any of these ambitions if you don't have the infrastructure in place. But it is important to stress that infrastructure, while essential, is not sufficient to becoming the world-class digital nation that we want to be. That it depends on businesses and individuals making use of that infrastructure to use technology to transform how they live their lives, transform how they do businesses. We've got a range of initiatives underway to try to improve digital participation in Scotland, from the Digital Participation Charter. We've got a Ministerial Advisory Board, which Fiona Hislop chairs. We've got a Digital Assistance Database, which is intended to help signpost the public to training opportunities in digital services, and we're currently identifying digital champions in each of the 32 local authority areas who will have a specific role of supporting communities to identify the barriers to digital access and help them to overcome them. Specifically in relation to businesses, we've worked closely in recent months with our enterprise and skills agencies and with key industry representatives to set out the ways in which we can build on existing measures to support businesses to make the transition to a digital economy. And I recently announced additional funding of £7 million to help us take forward those recommendations to make sure we're providing businesses with the support, with the training, with the guidance to realise their own ambitions in making the transition to a digital way of working, also supporting businesses that can benefit from the digital economy on the supply side of the economy. So that fund will help us take forward the recommendations that have come from that close work with enterprise agencies and representatives from industry.
Yeah. Okay, Alex.
Thank you, Convener. When the Minister came before us in March, we were told that £240 million of public sector funding had been secured for the Step Change programme to 2015. Can the Minister give us a breakdown on how that money's been allocated so far?
Yes, as I said a few moments ago, the breakdown is £126.4 million to the Highlands and Islands project, £5 million for the Community Broadband Scotland initiative, and the remainder of that is for the Rest of Scotland Step Change programme.
Any further detail on how the remainder of that money will be broken up?
That it will be the the whole sum that supports the contract for the rest of Scotland. As I said in response to Elaine Murray, on top of that, there's an additional £50 million that has come from 14 local authorities, which will clearly be spent in the specific local authority areas. And exactly where in those local authority areas will become clearer when we've got the contract signed. We know what the coverage of the main contract is and where local authorities intend to spend the additional sums.
On the subject of that 50 million plus that's come from local authorities, I'm interested to see that there's only 14 local authorities out of 32 that have become engaged in part funding these projects. Why is it that there are only 14 local authorities contributing?
But these are decisions for local authorities. I think it's important to point out that the 14 contributing local authorities in the Rest of Scotland project represent the areas with the lowest commercial coverage. So essentially they're out with the Central Belt and the city areas where there is a higher level of commercial coverage, so not the same need for state intervention, because essentially the public money is to fill the gaps that commercial coverage will not reach. And when you take the 14 local authorities combined, they cover almost 80% of the landmass of the Rest of Scotland area, which for the most part corresponds to our target area of intervention. So it's the local authorities that have the lowest level of commercial potential that need to spend to compensate for that have made the contribution.
At first glance, there may be some who would worry that the differing levels of funding may actually result in differing levels of services across Scotland. But are you suggesting that the differing levels of funding are designed to even out the level of coverage?
The Rest of Scotland project, the national funding pot will deliver, together with the Highlands and Islands, the 85% coverage countrywide. And within that project, a floor in each local authority area of 75% coverage. So that will come from the £240 million national funding pot. So local authorities' money, if they have contributed money, will be to get to coverage above the 75% minimum. And I should say it's a minimum. The national scheme may get some local authorities above that. I think it's unlikely, to be honest about it, that all local authorities are going to have the same level of coverage when this scheme is delivered. But that's why it's important that there is that minimum floor of 75%, so that we achieve a degree of consistency and a minimum degree of coverage. Obviously, for some of the areas, and particularly rural and remote areas, that will not be covered by this scheme, that's where initiatives like Community Broadband Scotland becomes important, because that's about finding the solutions that will help to cater for some of these areas.
So are Scotland's local authorities doing their bit as part of this programme?
Undoubtedly, yes, that is the case.
Are there any weak spots that...
No, I mean, local authorities, I think, have to make careful judgments about if and to what extent they contribute. Some local authorities, Glasgow, for example, is in a different position to a local authority in a rural area because of the extent of commercial rollout and commercial coverage that will be possible. So, I'm very happy that local authorities are working with us on this project and are putting their money where their mouth is, where that is in the interests of the populations they serve.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Cabinet Secretary, it would be fair to say that BD UK, the UK government under the auspices of BD UK are kind of the overarching body responsible for delivering broadband throughout the UK. And it would seem to be that they've got themselves in a bit of a mess over the Super Connected Cities project that seems to have fallen foul of EU state aid regulations. Perhaps you might want to comment on that, but is there anything that can be done to support, for example, Edinburgh in resolving that situation?
I mean, it is disappointing that the Super Connected Cities programme has fallen into the difficulty that it has. I mean, as you've indicated already, it's a UK programme. It's not a programme that the Scottish Government was directly involved in, and the problems have materialised around failure to get state aid clearance. So in short, it means that the programme cannot deliver broadband infrastructure. Now, the 3 cities in Scotland that were in line for inclusion in the programme were Edinburgh, Aberdeen and Perth. As a result of that, they're having to remodel their plans away from infrastructure provision towards things like vouchers for SMEs and things like that. Now that, as I said earlier on, has had a bit of a knock-on effect in terms of our rest of Scotland planning, and that is something I've already alluded to. You know, we're collaborating with Scotland Cities through the Cities Alliance. We've been assisting the 3 cities specifically in terms of the redesign of their super connected plans, and we want to ensure that any future funding for broadband in cities is planned properly from the outset, in conjunction with the Commission, in order that we don't fall foul of state aid rules. So we're working with the cities as closely and collaboratively as we can, and we see the Cities Alliance as a way of taking forward that collaborative work. But there's no getting away from the fact that the failure or the serious hampering of the Super Connected Cities programme is a blow to these cities, and I think a blow generally.
I mean, are you aware as to why BD UK got into this situation? Because the rules, as I understand it, from Europe haven't changed.
You know, I can only speculate that there was a failure to properly plan ahead and get all of the necessary approvals in place before, you know, getting ahead of themselves in terms of the programme. I mean, Colin will correct me if I'm wrong here or fill in any technical details, but in short, it's that state aid can't be used to provide infrastructure in city, urban areas where it's deemed that commercial rollout would be viable. So that's the problem in a nutshell. Why BD UK didn't envisage that or predict that or get that resolved at an earlier stage, I think is a question that would have to be directed to them.
Because you might remember that Aberdeen City and Shire Economic Future, ACCEF, that was the City and Shire working in partnership, had a fairly worked up bid, and your predecessor actually said to the committee, I haven't got the quote here, but you know, the rest of Scotland, that work or funding of that wouldn't be held up because the rest of Scotland had to catch up. Now all that work seems to have gone by the board, because BD UK are talking about cities as if they've got a ring fence round them, you know, and not the hinterland of cities as being part of a wider economic unit.
No, I mean, I can absolutely understand the frustration that is felt there. As I say, there's a limit to what we can say on behalf of BD UK, because this was a programme that they were very much in the lead of. But I'm more than happy on the committee's behalf to ask them to provide more background and more information about what went wrong and how they're trying to put it right.
I mean, and I think it's worth saying that Aberdeenshire are, I think, the largest contributing local authority to the Rest of Scotland programme. So we are taking forward their ambitions within that programme. And we will work, and we are working through the Cities Alliance with Aberdeen, Edinburgh and Perth in particular, to see how we can meet the connectivity requirements that they'd identified for the Urban Broadband Fund through different routes, if that's possible. And that may be things, as the Cabinet Secretary said, like promoting the use of voucher schemes to try and encourage the market to fill those areas. Okay, and, you know, a UK government report said that the BD UK projects were red or red amber, presumably, which means that they're not going anywhere very fast, and there's serious doubt about them. Have you or the Culture Secretary or the Cabinet Secretary for Culture had any discussions with your opposite numbers at the Department of Culture, Media and Sport at the UK level to ensure that Scotland's interests are being taken into account?
I've not had any direct discussions with UK ministers on this particular report, but the Scottish Government keeps in close contact with the UK Government as appropriate on all of these matters. The Major Project Authority Review, which I think is what you're referring to, was an exercise that we had no direct involvement in. It was undertaken by the UK Government's Major Project Authority, and it was looking at the range of broadband projects being supported by BD UK and identified a risk that delivery timescales would slip beyond 2015. I mean, I think it's fair to say there are some capacity issues around the UK, in the UK government in terms of broadband delivery. I mean, we're working ourselves to very challenging timescales and are not immune from some of the complexities around this work. We've also had the subject of the previous question, the wrangling between the UK government and the European Commission in terms of state aid approval. For our part, you know, we're very focused on delivering these major step change programmes with as much infrastructure as possible delivered before the end of 2015. That means making sure we're working with suppliers, with local authorities to pursue any opportunities to accelerate the rollout of that. So, you know, we're focused very, very hard on delivering against the targets that we've set ourselves.
Thank you. Jim.
Thank you, Convener. That takes us very nicely on to future work and monitoring. The Scottish Government have indicated that they intend to develop a new overarching measurement framework for the digital strategy, which would allow Scotland to measure its progress against the various targets which it's seeking to achieve. Can you provide some detail about the types of measurements that you plan to include as part of the framework, and also the work that would be necessary to establish how such measurements can be collected?
There's some detail on this set out in the digital economy strategy. There's in particular a very attractive diagram that tries to set out how we're going to do this. So I'll try to explain that as coherently as I can. I mean, the first thing to say is that the measurement framework that we published for the digital economy as part of that digital economy strategy is focused on the digital economy, but it will also have an application to the broader digital strategy. Basically, what we're looking to do is measure progress in the digital economy across both the supply side of the economy and the demand side of the economy. So on the supply side, there's a range of businesses that have opportunities, whether that's in providing infrastructure or digital products or providing skills to support the growth of the digital economy. The potential indicators around measuring success on that side are, you know, to a large extent official statistics. So we can look at GVA per head, we can look at the number of enterprises working in this area, business setups as a proportion of total business growth, employment in knowledge-intensive sectors, employment rate, for example. So we'll be looking at the provision of official statistics to allow us to demonstrate over time the success we're having on the supply side of the digital economy. On the demand side, it's more about adoption, usage, exploitation of companies of the digital potential. So, you know, again, potential indicators, if you're looking at adoption, is the percentage of premises that have next generation broadband coverage, percentage of businesses with broadband access, businesses that don't have that but have access to basic broadband usage. We'll be looking at things like the percentage of businesses with a website, the percentage of businesses who either buy or sell online, percentage of businesses using public authorities, electronic procurement systems, exploitation, percentage of businesses adopting or rather adapting their business strategy due to digital technology. So these are the potential indicators that we're looking to work up to give us a very clear measurement framework. And I'm more than happy, having run through some of that at speed, I'm more than happy to provide the committee with regular updates as we define those indicators and start to measure progress against them.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Is it possible for your colleague, Mr Cook, perhaps to update us on what the timescale is for the publication of that type of data?
Yes, we have a commitment to update or review the progress against the digital strategy every year. The last update was published in September, and we'll be publishing another update around that time, and that'll include the new framework.
Indicators that the Cabinet Secretary ran through would be included in that update?
Yeah, what will be set out in that update is the framework that we intend to use. Some of those, as Cabinet Secretary indicated, are populated by officially available statistics. Some will require or may require additional work, and they may not be collected in time for the September update, but the framework will be set out.
Might be a diagram or two.
Undoubtedly.
Thank you.
Gil.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. The London Olympics was described as Twitter Olympics, and athletes and spectators were in continuous contact with each other, sharing images and comments as events happened. And I wondered if there were plans ahead for Scotland for 2014, and if there was a possibility that we can take off where London left off, and that our Commonwealth Games could be the first multimedia Commonwealth Games.
I hope so, and that is definitely the ambition. I mean, the ambition of all of those associated with the Commonwealth Games is to make sure that it fully utilises technology to bring the experience to as many people as possible, and to make sure that those that are physically attending the Commonwealth Games benefit from that as well. I mean, we work closely, Shona Robson in particular, obviously, with the Commonwealth Games Organising Committee, with Glasgow City Council, with other partners, to ensure that we do meet that ambition and that we genuinely have a world-class digital Commonwealth Games. That's about the games themselves. It's obviously about the legacy that we're trying to achieve through the games. I mean, just some of the highlight, the 5th Glasgow 2014 Progress Report, which was published just last month, focuses on some of the highlights to date. But in relation to digital, I'm aware the new Hydro Arena in Glasgow has been in the news a bit lately, but the digital specification of it will include a Wi-Fi system that's capable of supporting 12,000 concurrent users, which is pretty massive. Visitors to the games will be greeted by more than 100 digital screens and totem poles, which are masts that will be positioned around the external landscaping that will help to show people where to go and provide information through a range of digital signage. The IT partners of the games are obviously very fully engaged in making sure that we fulfil the potential of that for the games as well. So I think in a digital sense, as well as I hope in many other senses, the Commonwealth Games will meet that ambition and be as good as, and who knows, maybe even manage to do it better given developments in technology than the London Olympics managed.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Thank you.
Anyone else have any final questions? Okay, thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary, and we look forward to getting the further information that you've promised us throughout the session. Can I briefly suspend to allow the witnesses to leave the room? To agenda item 2, public petitions. The second item of business today is to discuss 2 public petitions, PE 1475 on bus services and fares, which is new to this committee, and PE 1236 regarding the junction at Lawrence Kirk. So I welcome Nigel Don, the local MSP for Lawrence Kirk, to the meeting. Can I invite comments and views from members on each of the petitions? First of all, the one on bus services and fares. Yes, Elaine.
Yeah, the committee will be aware that Ian Gray is in the process of preparing a member's bill, which the Transport Minister has said on record that he's quite happy to have a look at it and see whether or not it's, that the government would support. And I think some of the issues certainly within that would be encompassed within Ian's bill, so it might be something that we, if that does progress, that we might want to monitor it alongside that, because presumably it would come to this committee.
Yeah, you're right. In fact, I was substituting on public petitions when this was first considered by the Public Petitions Committee, and I said exactly that, that Ian Gray's bill would cover part of the petition, and also that as a committee we looked at, I think the other thing was on concessionary travel, we looked at that in relation to the budget every year, and as well as, and I mentioned the fact that we were looking at it in relation to the community transport inquiry, and that also at the budget time we looked at BSOG. So I suggested to the Public Petitions Committee that, you know, this committee had these matters under review anyway as part of our normal routine work. So, anyone else want to comment? So we suggest that we, what normally happens here,
close the petition.
that we
Ian Gray is aware of the issues.
Yeah. Yeah, so should we close the petition and make sure that Ian Gray's aware? Well, he will be aware, I would have thought, of the petition and the matters in it.
Yeah, I suppose we do look at the other things anyway. That yeah. I suppose if we can pass it over to Ian and see if that,
Is that agreed?
his could maybe address some of the issues that are in there.
Okay. And then with the petition on the Lawrencekirk Junction, we've had a reply from Transport Scotland. Alex, do you want to?
Yes, I'm pleased to see the reply that we've got from Transport Scotland. It doesn't give us a great deal of information other than to tell us that the meeting that took place on the 30th of April was productive, and that the further meetings will be held later this year to take this matter forward, and they'll continue to report to the committee. I think there's little that we can do with the information that's been provided, but I would be very keen to keep this matter alive on the committee's agenda so that we can continue to monitor it and monitor it in greater detail when there's something to actually monitor.
Nigel?
Thank you, Convener. Can I just endorse what Alex Johnson has said? I mean, this seems to me to be the classic holding letter, and I think my constituents would be very grateful if the committee could consider more detail as and when it's available, please.
Convener?
Yes,
I think,
Jim.
obviously, I agree with both of the members who've spoken in relation to this petition, and obviously they have a first-hand experience of the issue. But I think it's interesting, the letter from Transport Scotland says that it will take a number of months to collect the data from all relevant authorities. I think it would be inappropriate to close the petition while that process was ongoing.
Okay, so we want to keep the petition open. Just hope that doesn't give kind of false hope to the petitioners. That's my only worry. You know, I'm quite happy if it's the agreement of the committee to keep the petition open, but I don't think we're going to see any major progress soon, and I hope that the petitioners realise that. But I think, you know, as a committee, we've managed to get a result insofar as Transport Scotland, quite frankly, committee members, you gave the Transport Scotland a flea in their ear, I think, when they appeared in front of us, and it certainly motivated them to have those discussions on the 30th with the local authorities and Nestrans, and I think the official line is they were productive, but I think that is true, and obviously, you know, action has come out of that insofar as these surveys are being done and carried out, and hopefully we will get some feedback. Is that what you want from these when these surveys are completed? Alex, again.
Yes, I was just going to say that the petitioner, Jill Fotheringham, has been on the case with this one for nearly 9 years, and I don't think she's under any illusions about the potential outcomes or timescales. But I think we owe it to her to ensure that we keep the process alive and keep turning the screw until such time as we have a definite outcome one way or another.
Okay, so is that agreement? Gil, sorry?
No, I was just going to say, I don't think by keeping it open it changes anything, really. And I don't think it puts either the petitioners in a false position, and I don't think it puts the committee in an invidious position at a later date, to be quite honest with you. I think it's a good idea to keep it open.
Margaret?
Important to see the result of the evaluation report that's been completed, and it'd be quite a good idea to actually get an estimated time when they expect it will be completed, because they've actually gathered in the information now, and they says it will take a number of months to collect the data from all the relevant authorities to allow it to be evaluated. So it'd be quite good if we could get a date so we can review it again and see what the report actually says.
Steve said in my ear that it's likely to be the end of the year.
That's fine.
Okay, so we agree to keep this petition open. That is agreed. Thank you very much. Can I briefly suspend the meeting until we have the next set of witnesses? Thank you. going through the agenda today at a rate of knots. So I'll give you a few minutes to get settled in. The third item of business today is to hear evidence from the Minister for Housing and Welfare on the affirmative instrument as listed on the agenda on the Mobile Homes Act 1983. This instrument is laid under affirmative procedure, which means the Parliament must approve it before the provisions may come into force. Following this evidence session, the committee will be invited to consider a motion to approve the instrument under agenda item 4. So can I welcome the Minister and supporting officials, the Minister Margaret Burgess, Minister for Housing and Welfare, Ben Hayes, Senior Policy Officer, Housing Services and Regeneration Team, Lindsay Henderson, Team Leader, Housing Services and Regeneration Team, and Jacqueline Pantoni, Principal Legal Officer of the Scottish Government. Minister, would you like to make some opening remarks?
Thank you, Convener. The purpose of this draft order is to protect vulnerable mobile home residents from exploitation by unscrupulous site owners, while also ensuring the viability of many well-run privately owned sites, often family-owned small and medium-sized businesses. The order amends the Mobile Homes Act 1983 to improve statutory protection for the permanent residents of mobile home sites. These protections are known as implied terms. They set out rights and duties of site owners and mobile home residents, and they're automatically included in agreements between owners and residents. If approved, the order will update existing implied terms. The changes include removing the scope for site owners to block residents from selling their homes. The order will also introduce some new terms for the benefit of residents, and these include a resident's right to undisturbed possession of their home, provisions regulating how pitch fees are set, and criteria for the recognition and consultation of a residents' association. The majority of the changes in the order were also applied to gypsy traveller sites run by local authorities and registered social landlords, as well as privately owned sites. We consulted separately on how the proposed changes would affect gypsy traveller communities, and it was decided that due to the mobility of persons in this community, the provisions in selling and gifting mobile homes should not be applied to gypsy traveller sites run by local authorities and RSLs. If approved, the order will be made under a power that enables ministers to amend the implied terms for all agreements, including those that exist currently. This means that the changes will benefit current residents as well as people they may sell their homes to in the future. We recognise the sensitivities in relation to the implied terms which govern the sale of a mobile home. The site owner as landowner and the resident as homeowner both have legitimate interests in sales. A full consultation was carried out, and I'm confident that a fair balance has been struck between the property rights of the site owner with the property rights of the resident, and we're grateful for the help that the residential mobile home stakeholder group has given in the development of these significant and positive reforms. We want to improve the rights of residents while recognising the legitimate interests of site owners. I ask the committee to recommend this motion approval. Thank you.
Thank you. The members have any questions? Elaine.
Yes, I'm very much welcome this legislation. I have a number of residential sites in my own constituency, and I'm certainly been aware over the years of, quite frankly, unscrupulous owners. For example, people believing that they have council tax as part of their rent and then finding they get a council tax bill, ways in which people are charged for utilities, and yet there's no way that they can actually check that the charges are fair or they're monitored in any particular way. Could you say a little bit more about the protection you might be able to, that this legislation offers those occupiers, and also how you will raise awareness, because I think it's quite important that those site owners who have been indulging in this sort of practice know that they won't be able to get away with it any longer.
In terms of the the protections for owners, that will be laid out in an agreement now that will be laid out between the site owner and the resident on the site, and they have a statutory duty to have that laid out, and it will cover things like fuel charges, utilities. That will be laid out in the site, pitch fees, which will be reviewed annually. There will be protection in terms of, as I said in my introductory remark, protection to have full possession of their own property, which is not the case at the moment because there are some unscrupulous owners who come onto the premises, have previously moved mobile homes and moved the resident to a less favourable site. So all of that, the Act will cover all of that, and they'll be protected in that. Certainly the cross-party group in the Scottish Parliament has been helpful in bringing together this order, but also in terms of notifying their members that this will be happening, that what's happening, and that's one way that we'll be able to get the message out there, and to site owners as well. But certainly we'll be looking at that to ensure that everyone in a mobile home is aware of the changes, and that the site owners are also aware of it.
Will it be retrospective in the case of people who are currently resident? Will they actually have increased rights now?
Yes, the rights will apply to everybody from if approved from the 1st of September.
The only other thing that was raised with me by somebody who is an occupier was still the issue of the 10% commission, that some people were still a bit unhappy about the idea that the owner could get 10%, up to 10% commission.
We looked at that very carefully, and that was certainly one of the areas that was more contentious within it, and we looked at that very carefully. But given the fact that some of the sites are very well managed, looked after, in very good locations, and that is reflected in the sale price that a resident will get when they sell their property, and also the fact that the very small and medium-sized businesses, some of these, it's a considerable part of their income. There's not a huge turnover within the mobile homes sales within any year, but for the site owner, that is a considerable part of their business income and keeping the site up to date. So given that, and we looked at it and decided that it was the fairest way to keep it.
As the Minister pointed out in her introductory remarks, while most of this applies to Gypsy Traveller, there are a couple of areas where there are specific clauses that the rules do not cover occupants of Gypsy Traveller sites either owned by local authorities or registered social landlords. Could the Minister say a bit more about why these specific omissions have been included?
These omissions are on the terms of the 10% commission and the sale, because within the Gypsy Traveller community, some on RSL sites and local authority sites don't actually own the mobile home. In any case, it's sometimes owned by the local authority, and in other cases, in terms of Gypsy Traveller, by the nature of the community, they are travelling. They're not permanent site residents as the generally elderly population in the resident sites, and that's why it was felt it would not be fair to include them within that. I don't know if you want to add to that, Lindsay.
I think that's
covered.
That's pretty accurate, yes.
Okay.
Is there any way in which these omissions effectively prevent Gypsy Travellers from getting the same protection that other members of the community might?
No, not in terms of the access to their home and the other rights that apply. They still will have all of that. What they won't have, they'll not be bound by having to give the owner 10% because they're not what we deem as permanent residents on the site.
So these omissions don't bring with them any disadvantage to the Gypsy Traveller community?
No, they don't.
Thank you.
Minister, I've got a number of mobile home sites in my constituency. In bringing forward this legislation, have you got any idea of what percentage of many of the sites where the mobile homes are owned by the park owner and let out, as opposed to people owning a mobile home on the site?
I mean, I'll maybe ask the official to answer that, but this legislation is about the residential sites and the agreement between the site owner and the homeowner. It's not about holiday sites or rental sites, but I don't know if you want to add to that?
That's right. The implied terms that this order amends deal with the situation where a resident of a mobile home owns the mobile home and they then essentially rent the land from the site owner. So these terms don't apply in a case where you're renting the whole thing.
So in terms of the people, nevertheless, there are homes on the site which are rented out by the park owner. What protection do they have in terms of the sort of situation that Elaine mentioned before, in terms of, you know, the home being up to standard and things like that? Does that come under other legislation, or?
I think it would come under other legislation rather than under this order, but
perhaps I could answer that. The Mobile Homes Act applies in relation to any agreement under which a person is entitled to station a mobile home on land and to occupy the mobile home. So I think it probably would still cover the scenario where somebody is renting. So the protections would cover all residents.
Because I can think of situation where the mobile home is really should be demolished because it's no longer wind and watertight and insulated properly, and the bills for LPG are like 200 quid a week, and people really can't afford them. So I just wondered what protection people like that might have.
I think we'll come back to you, the committee, in writing in that, because there may be issues under licensing there as well. So I think we'll come back to you on specifically on the rented properties, if that's acceptable, convener.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned that this legislation was drawn up by the help of park residents associations. How widespread are they across the country and across mobile home parks?
In the majority of parks, the understanding is there is some representative. I certainly know in my constituency, there's several mobile home parks, and each one there is somebody who has a connection to one of the groups, one of the representative groups. There are some national groups, there are some smaller groups, but they do have representative. But our view is to make sure and be clear that we get this message out to everyone and to every mobile home site and every local authority who license the sites, because that's a key way also of getting the message out there.
Okay, thanks. You'll be aware that the only written submission that the committee members have is from the British Holiday and Home Parks Association. Are you content that the issues that they raise have been sufficiently addressed? I mean, it is kind of to redress the balance between the homeowners and the park owners and the tenants on the site, but they raised a number of issues. I just wondered if you are happy that, or content that the issues that they raise have been addressed.
We're satisfied that we've got the balance right in this, and I think we have responded to the British Holiday and Park Association comments, but we are satisfied that the balance we've set is the correct one.
Anyone else have any questions? No? Okay, thank the witnesses very much for their evidence there. So the fourth item on the agenda is the formal consideration of motion S4M 0685, calling for the committee to recommend approval of the Mobile Homes Act 1983, amendment of Schedule 1, Scotland Order 2013 draft, and invite the Minister of Housing and Welfare to speak to and move the motion S4M 0685.
I think all I would want to do is now move the motion that the Infrastructure and Capital Investment Committee recommend that the Mobile Homes Act 1983, amendment of Schedule 1, be approved.
Okay, any further comments or okay, so I'll formally put the question. Oh, Alex.
I was just going to say that I think this instrument provides vital protection for people who are resident in mobile homes that they own sites owned by other people. And it's something we've been lobbied for a long time. And in spite of the fact there was one or two issues that the Minister said she would contact us in writing on, I don't think these are substantive, and I'd be very keen to see this approved at this meeting.
Okay, so I'll put the question on the motion. That is, the question is that motion S4M 0685 be approved. Are we all agreed? We are all agreed. Thank you very much. I suspend the meeting to allow the Minister and the witnesses to leave the room.